Let's talk about the San Antonio Spurs. Do they have the best player in fantasy basketball? Do they have the potential 10-time-in-a-row defensive player of the year? Do they have an MVP? Do they have the GOAT on their team? Michael Bolton's the GOAT, so I guess the answer's no.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and stay tuned at the end for your Moo Deng update. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by, who is it? FanDuel. Yeah, it's FanDuel. Now, through September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket thanks to YouTube and YouTube TV. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms, so give it a thumb up and a double bang and a comment as we go through and talk about these teams across the NBA. No real update since we talked about the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl this morning, but the entry link is below. I want to get over 1,000 people in it this year. I think we get there. Head-to-head categories, roto categories, and points. You can enter all three. Just fill in the link down below. Invites will start to go out at the end of this week. I'll start to do it in a few days' time. It just takes a little bit of time to do this. Draft orders will be set once the entirety of your 120-man batch of leagues is all confirmed. Once that's all confirmed, draft orders will go out. Slow drafts, hard cap, games cap for head-to-head points and roto. 2 fab processing times per day. It's a slow draft. You can participate from anywhere in the world. And there is a big grand overall prize for all 3 formats. The amount of the prize, I'm not sure yet because I don't have the full numbers in there, and that's what it's going to be determined by. But it will happen. And we've had that the last couple of years. The big winners, and I think the prize was like 6 or I think it was 7,000 for the head-to-head category league last year, and it was 3.5 for the points league battle royale winner. Not bad prizes. We're here to talk about the San Antonio Spurs, the fantasy season for these guys. Let's bang straight in, I reckon, because this is obviously a really interesting team. Hit the undervalued players, and that's absolutely not what we're doing because we've got to start off by looking at a projected starting 5, and I think most starting 5s are like this. Some are guaranteed, some have like 2 spots that we know of. The Spurs one, I think we're good with 4 spots. I think we're pretty locked in. Victor Wembanyama is going to start. Shockingly, I know he will start. Devin Vassell is going to start. I am very, very certain that Chris Paul is going to start. I am pretty sure that Jeremy Sochan is going to start. And I think we're going to have the pencil, Harrison Barnes. Barnesy. I think he will start. Although, they could go back to the guy they had starting last season in Julian Champagny. Maybe they decide that Chris Paul is only a backup and Trey Jones starts. Maybe they throw number 4 overall pick Steph Castle into the mix as either the starting point guard or the starting 2, and Devin Vassell plays up at the 3. All those things are, I guess, possible. I don't think they're likely. I think the fact that they've got Harrison Barnes, which he wasn't the main prize of that trade, it was getting that first-round pick swap. Was it even a pick swap? Yeah, that's fine. I think Chris Paul was brought in for a very specific reason, and that was to start. But maybe not. Maybe not. But I think we're going to go Paul Vassell, Barnes, Sochan, and Wembanyama. I would guess, but there are, again, different permutations of how it can go. I think that is the likely starting group. Now, let's take a look at some potential undervalued players on this Spurs team, and there are 2 guys at the moment who I think stand out. I could tell you, like, if I'm in a dynasty league, Victor Wembanyama is undervalued. As simple as that. That's I can tell you that part. That's disingenuous a bit, but it's true. But the guys that I think are currently sitting as undervalued, let's talk about the old man himself, Chris Paul, because His ADP on ESPN is 116. His rank is 119. That's for category leagues. His rank is for points leagues is 145. His ADP is still the same at 116. And I just think he's going to be better than that. Chris Paul played quite low minutes last season. I think we all know that. The numbers weren't big for Paul playing for Golden State. He saw just 26 minutes a game with 15% usage. He's 39. He still averaged 9, 4, and 7 with 1.2 steals. Shot 44 and 83 with 1.33. Now, he's not going to be a usage player. That's cool. But 28 minutes, 29 minutes, 11 points, 8 assists, 1.4 steals, 1.6 threes, 1.5 threes, whatever. Surely that's possible. Now, he's going to miss time. Again, that is very, very far from being a controversial statement that Chris Paul at his age is going to miss time. But the ability to get those assists as they sit at the moment and upside to maybe do more, I think is fantastic. And yet the rank of 145 in points league suggests that on an ESPN default system, he's not going to be draftable, which again, I very much disagree with. Very much disagree with. The second guy I've got on the undervalued list is Jeremy Sochan, because I think most of us think the first thing you think of when you think of Sochan. It's like, they made him a point guard. That's the first thing you'll think of. I'm almost certain that'll be the case. That's cool. But then they didn't. After 15, 20 games, I thought they pulled the pin on it early. Not that I think that it was going to work, but I thought they would commit to it longer, but they didn't. He played power forward for 70 games? He is incredibly young, Jeremy Sochan. Incredibly young. I think he's younger than Brandon Miller, maybe? He's about the same age. He's ranked 185 on Yahoo. For category leagues. Well, for Yahoo, it's across the board, right? ESPN, he's ranked 186 for categories. In points leagues, he's ranked 185 for Yahoo and 139 on ESPN. And the ADP sits at 145, Yahoo, 140 ESPN. Why? Like I said, I know that it was weird that he was the point guard. He did average almost 11.5 points, a 3, 6.5 boards, 3.5 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.5 blocks, shot 44 and 77. It's year 3. He's 6'8". That increased ball handling probably helps his development. There's definite room for him to become a better shooter throughout the season and throughout his career. I won't say that his upside is super, super high, but it's year 3 and he's had different experiences. This is a team that by getting Chris Paul, by getting Harrison Barnes, they're like, okay, we know what we've got. We've got an unbelievable player in Victor Wembanyama. Let's go. Let's actually make some moves to be better. And you might say, well, that means that Sochan's not good, so he won't play as much. And I don't think they view it that way. But again, I'm not sure. I just think at the moment, we are just... Sochan needs to just be higher than this. He could average 13 and 7, 3 assists, 1.4 steals, 0.7 blocks, 47% shooting, 80% from the line. I think it's not outrageous. Maybe it's not likely, but it's possible. And for a guy that, again, he's a starter, young player, third-year guy, 21 years of age, I think we are maybe just a little bit behind with him on where we need to be. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. You want tickets to events? Good work, because that is a great idea because it's fun. We love live sports and comedy and music and theatre and whatever it is, but sometimes finding those tickets is a real pain. Game Time is bringing out new features. They can't stop bringing out new features, in fact, Game Time, and their new one is Game Time Picks, where they go through all of the tickets that they have on their site and they show you the good ones. They highlight the good ones. So you have to sort through the wheat from the chaff. Chaff. Do you say chaff or chaff? Anyway, that doesn't matter because Game Time just gives you the good ones. Throw in the views from your seat, throw in the zone deals, throw in the flash deals, where prices to the event actually go down. Not this surge pricing nonsense where, it's getting closer, maybe we put the price up. No. They go, hey, events coming up here, we're slashing. We're slashing prices. Get in there. Flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing, you toggle on in the app so that you don't get surprised by fees later on. It's all there over on the Game Time app. So take that guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Okay, so we've looked at, so far, the undervalued players. What do you say we look at the overvalued players? Who is being pushed too high at the moment on rankings and on ADPs? And for a team that is like the Spurs and who they are, there's actually not that much there. But there is one guy, the horse, Keldon Johnson. This is a guy that people can't quit, and I do not understand it. I won't get it. I don't get it. Every time there's a talk about what this guy's, and I have been, yes, maybe I have been overly negative on Keldon, although I'm right, and I was right. They should have traded him last offseason. Apparently, great bloke, good in the locker room, all that sort of stuff. But his value was never higher than it was before last season started. He's not a starter on a good team. He was not a starter on a bad team last season. He moved to the bench. But I still have people saying now, yeah, he's going to start. Why would he start now? Maybe he does. Maybe they do put Keldon Johnson back into the starting lineup after running a whole season of him not starting. Why is his ADP on ESPN 115, which for category leagues is one of the biggest no-goes I've ever seen? Why is his rank for ESPN points at 145? He was nowhere near that. He didn't play that much. He's a 3-and-D player who's not a good three-point shooter and not a good defender. He's a guy that needs the team to be terrible and for him to have all the usage in the world. He averaged 16 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 0.7 steals and 0.3 blocks. He played 30 minutes off the bench. I actually think that comes down this year. He shot 45 and 79, which is not terrible from the line. It's fine from the field, but it's definitely not good. And he hasn't shown an ability to me to be a player that in smaller roles excels. I don't know what he brings that is positive on the court. Like, he's sort of just, what would the kids say? Mid. But the way that kids use mid, not actually mid, like he's bad. He's a, again, non-defender who takes threes and doesn't hit them at a high enough volume, doesn't take them at a high enough volume, and puts his head down and barrels into the lane. And I just don't really know why there'd be any interest in drafting him at this spot. Now, usually when I'm talking about whether guys are busts or overvalued, I don't like to look at players who have an ADP or a ranker that's outside the top 120, because we're talking flyer zone there. But there was one name that did show up to me that I was just like, I'm not really sure what we're doing here. What was it? You know what? Forget that, because I can't even find it. So maybe there wasn't. Maybe I got confused. Anyway, doesn't matter. Keldon Johnson, I think, is an overvalued player for this upcoming season for the Spurs. He just, taking him inside the top 120 is like an insane decision to me. Like, maybe he's the 8th man on this team, because the bench might be Trey Jones, it might have Steph Castle, it might have last year's starter Julian Champagne, it might have Zach Collins and Keldon Johnson in your bench group. Like, where does he get enough to be significantly better than he was last season? The answer is he can't. He won't be that, but some of those rankings suggest maybe. Let's talk breakout candidates, and this is one where it's interesting because I have to put Victor Wembanyama on this list. This is a good time for me. We're not going to put Victor under the lens. We are going to put Devin Vassell under the lens. And is Victor breaking out? Like, not really. Wemby is, like, he was awesome last year. He was, number 1 or number 2 for the final 3 months of last season. Let's just put his numbers up on the screen now. Wembanyama he played 30 minutes a night only, 32 usage. He averaged 21 and 10.5, 4 assists, 1.2 steals, 3.6 blocks, 47 and 80 from the field and from the line, 1.8 threes. That's 30 minutes. What if he plays 33? And some of this was 20 games playing not at center. He might average 4 blocks a game. He probably does. What if the efficiency pushes 50 and 82, and he hits 2.5 threes with 25 points, 11 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and the steals stay high as well? This is the potential best player in fantasy basketball. But not only this year, but for the next 10. He will win, I would guess, let's say 5 to 6 Defensive Player of the Years. He's going to win MVPs. He's unstoppable to a degree. He's only young still. He's only year 2, obviously. But he was great. And there's still people having doubts about Wembanyama. So that's why I wanted to put him as a breakout, because I think this season he establishes himself as we're talking top 5 real-life player maybe already. Maybe by the end of this season. I don't know. Maybe. It's possible. When I do put Wembanyama's numbers and the confusion and the right skew on Z-scores with blocks and how that really overvalues those, when I put him through my Durant formula, as I do with everyone, it actually takes him down from number 1 in fantasy. Because so much of his value is through that outsized blocks category. And it's a little bit different to the way that I would approach it with like Miles Turner and Jaren Jackson in the past, where they might have been at 2.8 blocks, and I'd say, yeah, okay, but they might still be good and go from 2.8 to 2, and then you really lose value when the impact isn't as high. Wembanyama is a little different, is that the Z-score for that category is going to be really high. His block numbers at 4.4 or whatever they're going to be insane, and if he loses one block a game, he still might be better than everybody else by over a block per game. So you've got an absolutely gigantic buffer versus a 2.7 block player becoming a 1.7 block player and moving from first to seventh and losing that appeal. But it is worth noting that the way that traditional Z-scores work, that the way that blocks get crazily pushed up, that if I put it through my differing formula, he does move down to number 2 or number 3 actually. The other numbers are still great. He will be a number 1 player without really any question at any point. If you take him 1 or 2, it's not a problem. But just be aware that there is a lot concentrated into blocks. He's not at risk of a Jaren Jackson of going from the best block player to the 10th. He might go from, wow, we haven't seen this before, to, wow, we haven't seen this before, even though it's dropped by a block per game. That is how much room he has to drop off. But this is the number 1 player in all dynasty leagues, the number 1 player to be drafted in a lot of different category and points league formats. But if you did want to take him at 2, and if you saw him drop to 3, I can see the reasoning for it. As much as I love Vic, as much as we were banging on, I think I had him last year in dynasty startups at 2 or 3, which was honestly wrong. He should have just been 1 off the bat. And he is now. But yeah, I've been talking about how ridiculously good this guy is as a player and as a prospect. And Cooper Flagg is not quite this level, but I think also at the moment, people are underselling Cooper Flagg a bit. I saw someone say, yeah, Cooper Flagg is just like Brandon Miller. I don't think so. But that's beside the point of this discussion. Wemby, breakout, player, maybe. The other one I've got on that list is Sochan, because he is only 21. It is year 3. We could see a spike in shooting percentages. We could see a usage spike. Maybe not, but maybe. We could see the defensive stats catch up to some of the defensive potential or play, because he was focusing on learning a new position to start last season. I think some of his defense suffered through that. So he's at least an interesting-ish one to watch as a breakout guy. And it's another reason why I'm interested in picking him towards those later rounds. If we take a look at where things might go awry in terms of the risks across the rotation, it is probably that Barnes position. What if they don't start Harrison Barnes and it is Steph Castle in there? What if it is Julian Champagnie? What if they do decide to go back to Keldon Johnson? It just impacts the way that everything else sort of fits. So that's a risk. I'm not suggesting we draft Harrison Barnes. In fact, I'll suggest literally the absolute opposite. Do not touch him in 10, 12, 14 team leagues. Probably 16. Do not touch him. No point. Useless. But the minutes up and down impact other people and other rotations and other roles and all that sort of stuff. I think we get an idea of how that works. I will just have a look at what Barnes did last season in Sacramento. Not that it was super impressive, but it is Harrison Barnes. That's what he does. Barnes is now 32. He played 29 minutes with 16 usage. I think he actually plays lower minutes than that this season. 12 points, 3 rebounds, 1.2 assists. These are disgusting. 0.7 steals and 0.1 blocks. There is not a man who is 6'8" or taller who blocks fewer shots. Maybe I'm making that up because Bojan Bogdanovic exists, so maybe he's in there. But he is one of the worst defensive stat players in the NBA. 47 and 80. He had that stretch of about 4 or 5 games where he couldn't miss a 3 where he was great, and that's where you stream him in and go, oh, we'll see what happens. But otherwise, you don't touch him. He's bad. He's not a good fantasy player. And honestly, he hasn't been for a long time. The next thing is like, what do they do for the point guards? Because we heard all the way through the draft process, we heard about Steph Castle telling teams, don't draft me. I'm actually a point guard. Don't draft me. And then he goes to a team, and this is part of where I have my concern about him, is like, could Steph Castle play 0 minutes at point guard when a team is healthy? Because Chris Paul's starting and Trey Jones is the backup. So how much does Castle play at point guard? But what if they do decide to go with Steph Castle over Trey Jones? Now, Jones was really useful last season. 10 points, 6 assists, a steal. Shot somehow 51 from the field despite never taking threes, or maybe that's why his percentage from the field was up. He's only 25, but he is literally just a backup point guard. But he's a backup point guard who's good and is a better current NBA player than Steph Castle. He's a better passer than Steph Castle. And if you want to have a facsimile to to bloody Chris Paul running the second unit, well, Jones is it. But what if they say Trey Jones is out of the rotation entirely and Castle's the backup point guard? That means Malachi Branham is getting back up 2 minutes. Does Branham start? Okay, I don't know. And he's bad too. There's many different directions that they can go there that could change things. And I'm talking all this stuff about Jeremy Sochan. What if they're just not in on him? What if they said, like, yep, yeah, we tried it 2 years, but we've got Barnes, he's going to play that spot now. We'll go back to Keldon at 3. We'll keep Julian Champagny there. And Sochan's a 25-minute bench player. I don't think that'll be what they do. But I can't fully rule that out. I sort of can, but I can't. So that's a risk as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. We've been talking about FanDuel on here for a long time. It's America's #1 sportsbook, so you've heard me speak about it before. And now we've got a different offer. No boosts, no bonuses. It's NFL Sunday Ticket. Every FanDuel customer who places a $5 bet up until September the 22nd gets a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With YouTube and a full the YouTube TV base plan, you get access to all out-of-market Sunday afternoon NFL games for that 3-week trial. All you got to do, have your Google account, your payment linked. You can cancel that at any point as well, but you get to trial NFL Sunday Ticket for those 3 weeks. So go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, let's put Devin Vassell under the lens. Vassell has been a favorite of mine for a while. I think that he's had some injury problems in previous seasons. I thought he stepped up pretty well last season and sort of delivered on some of the hype that we've had at times for him. And now it's a really interesting stage because they've got their player. They've got Wembanyama. They've got a point guard now. And Vassell's got to step up and be the number 2 player. He's got to be the number 2. There's no one else who I think has any ability at the moment on this team to be that guy. It has to be Vassell. You can see on this graph here that like his creation to turnover ratio, which is not just turnover percentage, not assist to turnover ratio. Creation's about, open passes to teammates and all that sort of stuff, not just the ones that lead to assists. It's really high. For a guy that's an off-ball player, allegedly an off-ball player, it's pretty high. So his ball control, his passing, has improved leaps and bounds the last 2 seasons. His offensive load was decently high. His shooting was pretty good. He doesn't draw free throws enough, and that's probably got to be the next step here for Vassell. And defensively, I think there's a little bit more to come from him. I think he can be a much better defender than he is. His deflection rate and his rebounding numbers are solid enough. I think there's a little bit more that can come out of that. And when you look, what's really interesting to me on this is you look at these similar players from last season, and on offense, it lists Terry Rozier and D'Angelo Russell, 2 guys who, I guess, combo guards who score and pass, but you wouldn't consider Vassell that type of passer. On defense, it's Gary Trent, who came out as one of the top comparisons, and then the overall comparison, which I think would be an unbelievable outcome for San Antonio, is Mikal Bridges, which is really intriguing because when I went into my similarity tool for fantasy stats, the names that came out at the top were Terry Rozier and Mikal Bridges. The graph on the right-hand side is play types. He has 2 real dominant play types. Spot-ups, which he is going to continue to do, but also pick-and-roll ball handler. So while we talk about Vassell for this season, and we think, yep, he can do a little bit more and he can be a little bit better, how much is he going to get a chance to be a pick-and-roll ball handler with Chris Paul there now? So does that pick-and-roll ball handling percentage drop? Where does it go? Towards spot-ups? He did nothing off screens last season. Does that jump up? Does the handoff game improve? He doesn't do anything in ISO. Does that improve? Because I don't think that ball handling role is going to be as big for Vassell. He played some games at point guard last season as well. I don't think it's going to sit in the exact same spot. So there's going to be a change in role. So before we get overly excited about what Vassell's going to bring, and we should have a level of excitement, His ADP is 70. His rank on Yahoo is 67. ESPN's got his ADP at 89, which is ridiculous. That almost pushed into my undervalued, and I think it is. There is today like how Chris Paul changes a team around. What does Barnes do? What does Castle do if he does anything? So that there is something there. And then if we want to get a little bit more, not even conspiratorial, but look at his Darko career progression. He flirted at the beginning of last season as being like a neutral zero Darko guy. And over the last 2 years, it's gone down. His impact has become negative. And that's concerning. I really like Devin Vassell as a player. I think he's going to be a really good player. That is a concerning trend for a guy this young. And I can't ignore that totally. The headshot plot you can see here has two things. Y-axis, off-ball gravity. X-axis, on-ball gravity. Why did I include that? Because of the amount of pick and roll ball handling that Vassell did. And now the fact that Chris Paul is going to be there. And that probably moves Vassell more into an off-ball role. So I've included Vassell on this graph, as well as some of the top fantasy comparisons to him. Mikal Bridges, Terry Rozier, Jeremy Grant, and Franz Wagner. And I'll show you that graph in a sec. So if we're talking about on-ball gravity, out of that quintet of players, the only player with more on-ball gravity, where had the importance of him having the ball, teams had to pay attention to that. This is a basketball index stat. Rozier was the only guy there. And Rozier is someone we look at from that group. Rozier, Wagner, Jeremy Grant, and Mikal Bridges. Terry Rozier can play as a point guard. Now, Vassell is close to Rozier, so he's got that ball handling skill. There are two players who had bigger off-ball gravity, Mikal Bridges and Jeremy Grant. And Grant shot really well from three. He doesn't do anything else, but he shot really well from three. So Vassell sort of sits in the middle of all of these players, which I think is about right. He's got a level of ball handling ability, pretty good. He's got a level of off-ball gravity, pretty good. But he's going to need to transition that off-ball gravity because I think he's going to be doing more of it this season. And I think it will come. And this is all just tying back into a slightly different role. Do the assists drop? Does the usage rise? Does he see more open shots because he doesn't have to self-create as much? I think that's a real distinct possibility for Vassell for this upcoming season. So you look at the comparisons of the fantasy players there. Vassell is the thick line. And then we go Bridges, Rozier, Kevin Porter, who is back in the NBA this season, going to be a much smaller role, but the shape of his game is similar, interestingly. And Jeremy Grant, one of the other ones on that list. And then Franz Wagner came after that. But they're all so similar-ish type of players. I just think it was interesting to see the comparison with him with someone like a Mikal Bridges, either through fantasy stats or real-life numbers, that compared favorably. And then like the way that old mate Terry Rozier can work as a point guard, and maybe Vassell did a bit of that. So if we look at what Vassell did last season, he's 24. 33 minutes and 23 usage, and I think that stays about right. Almost 20 points, 4 rebounds and 4 assists with a steal on 47 and 80. I don't see gigantic room for that to improve. Maybe 2.4 threes becomes 2.8. Maybe 23 usage becomes 25 usage. But maybe the assists go from 4.1 to 3.5. So he's one that's, I'm not sure he's 100% hit his ceiling, but it's feeling a little bit like that, especially with when we talk fantasy, getting those assists becomes more useful. And if that drops off a little bit, that maybe just takes some of the top away from what he potentially is able to do from a production standpoint. Maybe. Let's talk about injury concerns or existing injuries currently on this team. And thankfully, we're okay heading into the year. We do have to be worried about Chris Paul, though. He is 39. He is the second oldest player, I believe, behind LeBron. He had multiple hamstring issues. He's broken his hand about 30 times. There's always something with Chris Paul. So we've always got to be concerned that at this age, the soft tissue stuff is going to be a problem. Wouldn't be shocked if he pinged a calf and missed 4 weeks. Zach Collins has had multiple lower body injuries. That's why he missed towards the end of last season, but I think that was a hand or whatever it was. But he's had the broken leg. He's had a shin stress reaction as well. He's had multiple ankle injuries. So there's a concern with his lower body and some of the stability of the structure there. And then there's Charles Bassey, who had a patellar issue and then I think a torn ACL. He's had quite a few injuries as well, but I'm not sure that he's really going to be a part of anything. As much as I do think Bassey is an interesting player, I'm not sure he's going to do a huge amount here for this upcoming season with Wembanyama and Collins ahead of him. Last season when we entered the year, Zach Collins was the projected starter, and he did start at center, and his numbers were okay, although we had weirdly high turnovers and couldn't hit threes. He ended with 11 and 5 and 0.8 blocks, shot 48 and 75, and played 22 minutes. But he's probably not hitting that unless Wembanyama goes down. Now, if Vic does get hurt, we add Collins absolutely everywhere because he is a good enough fantasy player. I think we did the Raptors earlier today. I think Kelly Olynyk. He's got that sort of, not the passer that Olynyk is, but that sort of fantasy-friendly game with good percentages, some shot blocking, some scoring, some three-point shooting. But that's going to require an injury, really, for that to do anything, for that to occur. If we take a look at the schedule for the Spurs this season, I don't think there's a huge amount here. They've got 48 quality games, which is in the middle of the pack towards the back end. They've got 15 back-to-backs, the second highest number. They have 14 maximum game weeks, which is second highest, and their playoffs, they're all right. If you finish on March 23rd, it's 3-4-4. March 30th, it's 4-4-4. Yahoo default is 4-4-3, and ESPN default is 4-4-3-4. Not a huge thing happening there with those things, with that schedule. Nothing that's majorly like, we got to target them or we got to avoid them. It's all right. Let's take a look at their youth invasion. Let's take a look at their young guys under the age of 23. They've got quite a few of them. We've already spoken about Victor Wembanyama, and the numbers that you can see next to those names are my Bazemore Dynasty ranking. Victor Wembanyama's in the top 1. You're not shocked at that. He is number 1 by an... If you have Victor Wembanyama in a Dynasty League, you do not trade him for a single thing. I do not care what they offer you. You do not trade him ever. Don't trade him. I've got Sochan as a top 75 Dynasty guy. Again, still remarkably young. I've got Steph Castle as top 125. I am just not as high on Castle. And that is okay. We can have different opinions on players. Castle, there are numerous things that worry me about him. And part of the way that the numbers and the Bazemore Dynasty metric works is it takes into consideration some of the production this season. Because Dynasty, you can plan for 5 years. That's true. But leagues don't always last that long. So you want to have a little bit of weight on what's going to happen immediately. And I have some concerns with Castle, who had some really high usage games in Summer League, but at UConn, he played 27 minutes only, 22 usage, he averaged 11 points with only half a three, under 3 assists, and for a guy that's allegedly an elite defender, I don't think he is. I think he's a good defender, maybe a very good defender. 0.8 steals, 0.5 blocks. He's bad free throws at under 76, and his field goals are not particularly strong. He's just a player to me that doesn't have a great fantasy translation because I don't think he's a high usage player. I don't think he's a high steals player, or blocks player, or field goal player, or free throw player, or assist volume player, if I even said that. Or he's a good 3-point shooter. He might be a good real-life player. I'm not convinced, because I think this draft class was just bad all around. And he'll be useful enough. But I also don't really know what he's doing this season. He's in that zone. If you want to take a flyer on Steph Castle in the final round of your drafts, do it. Totally okay. But also, where is he getting 30 minutes without injury? I honestly don't see how that's possible. There is also the Connecticut risk of Dan Hurley putting all these players in absolutely perfect situations on an absolutely loaded roster that when they go to an NBA situation, it won't be like that. And Castle's going to play... he was not the point guard on that team. He was not their point guard. Their point guard was Tristan Newton, and Cam Spencer handled the ball as well. He wasn't the point guard. He was a point guard in high school. That's true. But you have your own opinion on this if you want. You can watch as much Castle you want. I just do not see him as future star or having a great fantasy translation skill set. When I put him into my fantasy shape tool, this is for this year's projections. Remember, there's plenty of room for growth, but it's Vince Williams. It's fine. He's good. Bruce Brown, good role player. Delano Banton, Jaime Jaquez, Najee Marshall. They're fine. They're good. They're good enough players. But they don't blow you away fantasy-wise. And I think that's sort of where Steph sits. Malachi Branham's a young player. He comes out top 175 in Dynasty. That's what the number came out as. I don't love it. I don't think he's very good. I think he's had opportunities and really struggles with efficiency and doing anything else that's not scoring, and no team is going to want him to do that. So I don't love that. Blake Wesley, who's had some horrific moments in his first 2 seasons, he's shown development. He's shown ability as a point guard, but with Castle there, with Jones there, with Paul in there, I think they're just no. You can't really take on a point guard role, so I guess we'll find out. And then CD Sissoko, second round pick last season. I thought we'd get to see a little bit more of him. We did not. His numbers at the Ignite were solid enough. His numbers in the G League last season were bad. And I thought he looked terrible in Summer League. And I've got him as a top 275 guy as well. Same with Blake Wesley, which of course is not super encouraging. If you want to talk risk-reward players now, you know I did the show, the best versus worst case scenario on players, using a bunch of different things and not talking about minutes variance and minutes fluctuations. The guy that did pop to me as a risk-reward, high-upside player is Devin Vassell. So we have to be a little bit careful of that because his category league variance was 84 spots. That's probably one of the biggest ranges I've seen. His fantasy points variance, a little bit different, 5.8. And this doesn't even account for minutes or games played. So, yeah, there's a best case, worst case, but when we see his ADP and his rank sits closer to best case than worst case, that should give you an element of pause, I think. I'm not trying to steer you away from Devin Vassell. I like him. But I'm trying to see what the next step is. And then we look at guys who are potentially over the hill. Because once you hit the age of 29, as we know, the production usually declines. And the two guys they brought in are the two guys on this list. 39-year-old Chris Paul and 32-year-old Harrison Barnes. Paul, totally fine to draft him late rounds in top 100 if you want. Barnes, no. We don't even look at him in the top 200. And that is the major things that we need to talk about with this San Antonio Spurs team. Wembanyama, take him at 1, take him at 2. If you want to take him at 3, look, I get it. It's okay. The blocks are hugely outsized. They impact the value of him through a standard Z score, but I still think he's worth the 1 or 2 pick. Vassell, 70s, I guess. Chris Paul, I like it. Obvious risk of missing, but could he just bump his minutes and assist rate up from last season? Yes, I think that's possible. As I just click over to my boring ass face. Like Keldon Johnson's not a 12-team draftable player. Trey Jones isn't a 12-team guy. Zach Collins, Barnes, Castle, Champagny, none of these guys are, I don't think. And then Sochan's the one that we look at as those later round flyers. And I think he's just being a little bit undervalued. But then you got like a Mikal, who's a good per-minute player if he ever plays. But when does he play? And Bassey. Then there's Harrison Ingram on a 2-way. They've got Brandon Boston signed, but I don't know if he actually makes the roster. He's a player that I have liked, but he's never had an opportunity really. But maybe that's because he's bad. They've got David Duke. No, not that one. On a 2-way contract. And that's sort of where this team sits. So, if you want to sit, I don't know, somewhere, hit the thumbs up, leave a comment down below, get into the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, and guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.